Greetings and felicitations.
Hip hip hurrah, tally ho.
Hey, baby doll.
Hey, Pid.
Hey, let's talk about this Japanese classic, Godzilla from 1954.
And what a movie it was.
Let's talk about the details first. Directed by Ishiro Honda, starring Akira Takarada, Momoko Koshi. Release date October 27th, 1954 in Nagoya, November 3rd, 1954 in Japan. Running time 96 minutes. Japanese language. Now, here's something. I tried to research what the budget was and what the total was up to date. The budget back in 1950s was 100 million yen. I couldn't find a conversion rate, but it was a huge box office success, taking in over $2 million US, or even worldwide. This is the movie that really got the big monster craze going on an international level.
Well, this was actually, I think, one of the more intelligent monster movies out of the ones that we've been watching lately.
Yeah, you're not kidding. I would say this is my first time ever seeing this, the original Japanese version. We know that 2 years later, in 1956, there would be an Americanized version of it. And we've seen so many Godzilla movies over the years. In fact, the Godzilla franchise has the record for having the most sequels or reboots, even more than James Bond. I mean, there's over 30 of them.
And it's the movie franchise that has lasted the longest.
Yes, no doubt about it. I mean, the whole world loves and is familiar with Godzilla. I remember as a kid playing with the Shogun Warriors Godzilla toy and pushing that lever on his back of his head, and the fire would come out. It would be like a tongue of fire, and his hands would pop off. I mean, by that time in the 70s, Godzilla was almost a caricature. Whereas we look at the roots, the original Godzilla, boy, this movie had some disturbing scenes. Even if it was like the movies that would come later on, he had this goofy sidekick with him. I mean, I liked all the creatures that he fought, like Mothra and Rodan.
Yeah, since you mentioned it, like the cartoon had Godzilla and Godzuki.
That's right. Yes,
yeah.
yes. We remember the cartoon series too. I mean, they deviated so much over the decades of the original root of Godzilla. This movie, you gotta figure, came out less than 10 years after the bombing of Japan. So that horrible situation had to be obviously on viewers' minds when they watched this movie originally in Japan. I'm watching it now saying, wow, there's just some heart-wrenching, very uncomfortable scenes. I can't imagine what the viewers thought about it back then in Godzilla's home country.
So we watched it in the original in Japan, in Japanese, and with subtitles. And yes, you think that, I mean, we know it was made by the Japanese people for the Japanese audience. So it was very personal to them. And the way they mentioned about the H-bomb, it was so many times in the movie. And,
yes.
Saying that it's actually what happened to Godzilla. They said he probably lived in a trench in the ocean, and H-bomb testing somehow allowed him to leave his home or destroyed his home. And so now that's the reason he came up out of the sea.
I mean, there were so many scenes with children in despair, children being separated from their parents. I don't think there were a lot of movies in the 1950s, American-wise, that were showing scenes like that.
Yeah, it was something that was very touching, and to see it from the Japanese point of view, they were the victims of the bombs. And so seeing this now in this movie, and what Godzilla came through the country and did to them was probably a lot like what they had seen during the time of the H-bombs. The people lying dead in the streets, or the people wounded, and the nurses trying to help them, trying to bandage them and do whatever they could. It was very sad, and it was very terrorizing.
And like I said, as an adult, this is my first time seeing this movie, and I knew it was going to be more on the serious note than the goofier versions of Godzilla that would come later on, especially in around the 70s. But man, this was heart-wrenching. I thought the actors were superb in as far as the heroics, the areas of wanting to sacrifice self for the betterment of others.
And the way the characters were in the movie. So you had the guy that was the scientist who didn't want to kill Godzilla. He said, we need to study it. Which, I mean, I can see how it makes sense to a scientist, but, he didn't present any ideas like how could they even capture it long enough to study it. I mean, they couldn't do, and so they were trying. They couldn't do just about anything to stop it anyway.
And we look at any type of dinosaur movie that would come decades later, this is the theme too. Scientists want to study these large creatures.
Yeah, which is a good idea, but how?
Yeah.
You have to think how though. I mean, if you can come up with a way, then sure.
I mean, I thought this was such a well-made movie. It was worthy of really paying attention to, and not so much of a popcorn movie, because sometimes you get these 50s monster movies. They're just on the silly side to some point, but this really had a lot going on. Not only the message and the storyline, but as far as groundbreaking work, I think it was incredible to look at how Godzilla looked, the visual effects of him. There was I wouldn't say a rumor, but a misunderstanding for years that the Japanese couldn't figure out how to make stop-motion animation like King Kong and Mighty Joe Young. But that's not the case at all. In fact, it wasn't in their budget. They realized that they didn't have the equipment for it, and it would take so long. It would actually take years to do what had been done in America. So instead, they developed this system of having a man in a suit. But if you notice, it didn't really look like a man in a suit. They rubberized it in such a way, and they put him on lifts, so it actually gave him more of a creature walk. And that suit looked so fantastic because it was almost seamless, to the point where the actor inside would pass out at times from the extreme heat.
Amazing. But it was in black and white, and so that helped make it look more seamless. And
yes,
certain visual effects were easier when it was in black and white.
And because we view Godzilla as that look now instead of a stop motion look, I actually prefer Godzilla movies with this. I can't imagine if they did what they initially wanted to do and make it stop motion. I don't think it would have that same visual impact.
I thought the movements in the movie looked really good, so there wouldn't have been a reason to do it any other way, even though they did it for budget reasons. But it did look good the way they did it.
Oh, fantastic. And how they miniaturized, recreated different areas in Tokyo. Neither of us have been to Tokyo before. Apparently, the people in Tokyo recognized all the different areas that the miniatures were representing. And one of the buildings that he destroys is the Nichigiki Theater. His tail smashes into it. And at that time, there were viewers in that theater. So they were freaking out, saying, oh no, Godzilla's taking us over. So people were running out of the theater. I mean, can you imagine being a kid at that time, seeing a movie like that takes place not in a foreign country, but right where you are? That must have been awesome. It must have been like watching King Kong in New York for the Japanese.
Well, awesome, but also scary if it's right where you are. And then the morals of the other scientists too. The guy who invented the oxygen deleting machine or something.
Yeah, it was kind of curious. Like, what in the world is this? An oxygen deleting machine? Where are we going with this?
Well, at first you don't know what it is when the woman screams. And
at first we were both like, why is she screaming? It's a bunch of skeletons in the tank. Like, we didn't even figure out what was happening exactly.
Well, yeah, not at first, because they don't want you to know at first, but then when they go back to the scene and explain it.
Yes.
But then the man was very reticent to use it, and he said he only wanted it to be used for good, not for destruction. But he knew that it was
very similar to what Albert Einstein said.
Definitely.
Yeah, so you see the real world parallels in this movie.
I mean, I read that Albert Einstein was actually a pacifist, but he was part of the team that developed the hydrogen bomb. He wasn't the only one who did it. He was part of a team, and it was to win a war. But the movie did bring out these parts of these characters too, which I thought was good. It had the character development along with the monster development. The idea that this monster had lost his home.
And I have to say the parallel with this and King Kong is that you actually have sympathy for Godzilla. Like, I had sympathy for King Kong when I first saw it as a kid. I felt so bad when he died. And when you realize that Godzilla lost his home, he's erupting because he's frustrated. He's on a rampage because he has nowhere else to go to.
And the idea of having that big electric fence, which didn't stop him, but that was very Jurassic Park, wasn't it?
It was. We can see that there are movies that are more modern day that pulled from this.
Yes.
And I have to say that the sound that Godzilla made, that roar, that iconic roar. Previously, for monster movies, they would just take different animals and layer the sounds together. But the technicians here didn't feel that it would give Godzilla a unique voice. So instead they took rubber gloves and coated them with resin and then moved them up and down the strings of a double bass and then reverberated that sound.
Interesting.
Like, man, it is such a cool sound. And you think years later, any other sounds that are so unique, it's layers of sounds that makes it so special. But I think this is one of the early pioneers of taking something that's so drastically different. Like, how did they even think about doing something so bizarre to make a giant lizard voice be heard?
Yes, and that was extraordinary.
And some version of it we've been hearing for the past how many
50
decades?
years.
Yes. It's just I love when you hear Godzilla's roar. You're like, man, that is awesome. Oh, and you mentioned that his breath. He had the atomic breath. I like that effect.
That was another well done thing that was in the movie. And when we were watching it, we were talking about this, that they didn't really say Godzilla, even though it had the word on the screen with the subtitles. But when you're listening to the people talk, no one said Godzilla in any type of accent or anything.
I didn't even see, because I was trying to watch their mouths. It didn't even look like they were saying Gojira. Mm-hmm. I was trying to follow it, so watching.
We were trying to figure out what was the Japanese name for it.
Yes, and it's not like the version that we were listening to. It had the words on the bottom, but there was nothing on it that sounded even like Godzilla. So I couldn't figure that out at all. I don't know if anybody's listened to this. If you want to comment below, if you could figure it out. I don't know. No time do we hear Gojira. And
another interesting thing was they said that Godzilla was an ancient myth in Japan, which I didn't know that. Like, it was, so the monster was something that
kind of like Bigfoot to Americans,
right? Something that they had heard about before, but no one had ever seen it before. But now here it is. And now that they've seen it, they know that that's what it must be. It must be this myth that had been talked about ages ago. That was an interesting way to put it in the movie. So I wonder if Godzilla really is an old Japanese myth before they started making the movies.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, you look at modern, we're constantly comparing and thinking about issues of Starlog magazine where we'll have modern filmmakers talk about their reference points of the things that they made. George Lucas said that this is one of the films that inspired him to use miniatures for his Star Wars movies. And you can see that. This is an early pioneer production of miniatures just looking pretty awesome.
It's an excellent idea, and it works when the filmmakers know how to do it.
We were talking about the name Godzilla. It's actually a combination of their words for gorilla and whale. So it's supposed to be a creature of great size and strength from the sea.
That's interesting. We kind of think of it as a giant lizard or a dinosaur. Mm-hmm. And they did mention the dinosaurs, the Jurassic period in the movie.
Yes, and we can look at the look of it because, yes, it might have the stature of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, but you see that the scales on back look more like a Stegosaurus.
Yes.
And instead of having smaller arms like a Tyrannosaurus Rex, it has larger arms. So it's its own unique combination.
Well, they said it's like from the period after the dinosaurs when there were lizards.
And as much as we love the look of Godzilla, we have to say we're thankful that they stuck with this design and not one of the ideas of having its head shaped like a mushroom cloud.
That would have been really strange.
Or even a giant octopus. I don't think a giant octopus would resonate with fans 50 years later.
Not as much. One thing about Godzilla, because he does resemble the dinosaur, that makes children like him a lot more too, because kids love dinosaurs.
I remember getting the Godzilla comics as a kid. I loved them. Yeah, you're right. The ending of the movie. What did you think?
It was a good ending, like that they actually were able to do something, to defeat him.
I thought it was just like, wait, what?
Yeah.
You're just going to wipe him out? He's just bones?
The great invention of the guy actually worked.
Yeah.
You don't really see movies in this way now because they always want to leave the potential for a sequel.
Well, that's what I was thinking because I only watched a bunch, not all of them, but a bunch of the subsequent films. I thought that he was going to die in some kind of way, maybe like King Kong. Remember how like King Kong died by falling off the Empire State Building, and then when they had that resurrection of King Kong movie in the 80s, Kong Lives, it just shows that he lived. They were able to give him like a heart transplant, or they were able to explain it somehow. But this, I mean, he's annihilated. They totally wiped him out. So, like you said, this was a finality for the monster.
They probably thought they needed a happy ending after all of that.
Yeah.
But then in another way, and because they did make Godzilla a sympathetic monster, it wasn't a completely happy ending.
The amount of destruction he destroyed was very different than King Kong. I mean, King Kong was encaged, but he didn't really do as much destruction as Godzilla. Godzilla was on a total rampage.
It looked like he walked straight across Japan, the whole country. Yeah. Came out of the water, walked across the island, and then back into the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
But because he was someone who had lost his home, and there had been talk in the movie about why can't we study him, and then the inventor of the weapon that destroyed him that didn't want to use it for destruction. You had all of those things coming in that kind of made it a bittersweet ending.
Yeah, as far as 1950s monster movies goes, this is one of my top ones by far. Yeah, I definitely give this thumbs up.
Yeah, definitely. It was an awesome movie. Thumbs up. Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.